and welcome to the Ray White Inner Brisbane Apartments monthly wrap. So my name is Ben Stockwell and I'm the Associate Director here at Ray White Inner Brisbane Apartments, and I work alongside our Managing Director Colin Walsh. So my role specifically is to do initiatives like this. It is to work with our investors directly around key specific updates that are going to affect you. And today what I'm going to be talking to you about is the Stage 2 rental reforms, which came into effect on the 30th of September 2024. So that's the one component or key issue that we're going to be talking about today. The other item that I'd really love to connect with you guys about is me and my role within Ray White IBA. So you guys as investors will be hearing from me on a more regular basis through key initiatives like our Ray White monthly wrap, and providing you key information updates about legislation, market trends, what's going on in the Brisbane city, and different aspects which will affect you as investors. One of our key initiatives besides this monthly wrap is working with our investors with respect to increasing rental yields. It is a, department which we are investigating within Ray White IBA, where we're actually going to be working with our key strategic, investment manager, Ben Smith, who everyone will be familiar with, as Ben obviously works to lease all of our properties. So Ben's been in 100% of our properties, as well as obviously your property management team. But what we're going to be working on is different case studies and scenarios where we could start spending a little bit of that, capital growth, which we've seen since 2020, where we've seen obviously your rental properties, sales value significantly increase. And we might be able to look at using some of that equity to either look at buying another investment property, but also look at renovating or doing minor tweaks to your existing investment. And we've got some really exciting case studies which we'll bring to you as a part of this. One of them was in Gotha, where we were able to spend a minimum amount of money in refreshing some of the furniture as well as painting aspects of the property, which let's say on average was about a $10,000 spend, and we were able to get a $160 increase in rent for that particular investor. Now that is a significant amount of money and increase. And what we've been able to do is essentially, based on that investment, she would get a return on that investment in her first 12 months, so essentially paying back the amount. But now we've estimated that obviously that $160 per week will likely grow over the next 5 years with regular rental increases. But in addition to that, obviously the paint, as we know on average, will last anywhere between 7 and 10 years, and furniture probably around that 5 to 7, depending on wear and tear. So you're going to get a significant return on investment for that period of time. So what we're going to be working with our investors on a more regular basis is talking to you guys about these investment strategies and going a little bit deeper on what we can do to, increase those yields, but work with you as well around what your property goals are. I mean, ultimately, it's not a topic that you hear from every single agency, and it is going to become a real point of difference for us because we are the market leaders in the Brisbane city. And we know that we set the benchmark for rents in the Brisbane city, and we push the boundaries where every other agency just want to do what everyone else is doing. We're not like that here at Ray White IBA, and my role is to work with you guys as our investors to get those potential returns, increase them, and work with our team, support them as a part of that process. So without going into too much detail, what I wanted to just say is welcome to the monthly wrap. My name's Ben Stockwell. I am the Associate Director working alongside Colin Walsh, and I am available to every single investor if you would like to call upon me at any point in time. If you're seeing challenges with your investment portfolio, if you want to talk about strategies with a difficult tenancy or scenario, if you want to talk about investment yields or any sort of scenario, please know that I am available to you. But I will not delay any further. We'll launch into our next topic, which might be a little bit dry for some of our investors, but give me, a little bit of leeway on this one, and we're going to talk about the stage 2 rental reforms. Without any further delay, what I really wanted to talk to you guys about today is the new legislative changes that came into effect in Queensland on the 30th of September 2024. So I'm going to say that again. The changes that we are talking about today came into effect in Queensland on the 30th of September 2024. Our role as your investment manager is to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information to be able to navigate these changes and ensure you can make informed decisions. So there's going to be 4 topics that we talk about today that have primarily changed in the 30th of September 2024 legislative changes. They are bonds, reletting costs, rent payment methods, and charging for utilities and services. I'm going to talk about each particular topic in detail, but also bring to your attention the main parts that you need to be aware of, just so that you can get the general sense of what those changes are and how it may affect you and your tenancy as you move forward. Okay, so these are for all of our investors. The first topic we're going to talk to about is bonds. So with the changes in legislation, bonds have been affected. What that means is we now, as of the 30th of September onwards, cannot collect any more than 4 weeks maximum in bond. Previously, many of our investors would be aware, we were able to collect bond for, let's say, 6, 8 or 10 weeks, whatever we wanted, for any rental properties that exceeded $701 per week. Okay, now with these legislative reforms, we can only collect a maximum of 4 weeks rent as the bond. So for any of our executive clients, for example, with Miele, Gaggenau and different types of parquet flooring and all that sort of stuff, our strategy was always to collect more in bond to ensure that we had more funds to be able to cover the cost of repairs for any damages that may have been seen. Now, with these legislative changes, we can only collect 4 weeks maximum in bond, all right? The other thing that you need to be aware of with these bond changes is a tenancy who has paid more in bond than the standard 4 weeks may be entitled to a refund of that bond or the difference, I should say, in that bond. So let's say, for example, a tenant paid 6 weeks in bond, providing that they meet the requirements for the refund, then they may be able to get a refund of 2 weeks. So we maintain, obviously, the 4 weeks, and the RTA may refund 2 weeks back to that tenancy. That's just as an example. There are key requirements that the tenancies need to adhere to be able to be eligible for that. But I won't go into the depths of that. The standard message here for most of our investors is that we can only collect 4 weeks bond for your particular property as we move forward. And that's for obviously any properties now from the 30th of September onwards. All right. The next thing that has changed, and this is going to be quite a significant change, is the reletting costs. So reletting costs are for scenarios where everyone in the investment world would be aware of the terminology break lease. So where a tenant has entered into a fixed term tenancy between the 1st of January 24 and the 1st of January 25, they decide that they need to end that tenancy. The real term, or the appropriate term, is an agreement to end a fixed term tenancy, but everyone in the industry calls it a break lease. Okay, so these reletting costs are usually charged to the tenant for compensation to you. So these reletting costs standard are the advertising, the letting costs of our agency, and then also the rent up until a new tenant moves in or the end of that fixed term tenancy. That is what every investor is used to. Now, the way in which the reletting costs are calculated now moving forward have changed, and they have changed quite significantly. Now, I'm going to be really clear on this. These are for agreements that have been entered into from the 30th of September 2024 onward. So agreements that have been entered into prior to the 30th of September 2024, there is a transitional period with these legislative changes, which means that the compensation that those tenancy agreements will pay will not change. So any agreements that have been entered into prior to the 30th of September 2024 will be under the old compensation, and that is advertising paid by the tenant, the letting cost of 1 week's rent plus GST is paid by the tenant, and rent up until a new tenant moves in is payable by the tenant, providing we as the property management agency and yourselves as the investors and landlords also mitigate the tenant's loss. Okay? Again, I'm not going to delve too much into the mitigation of loss, but these are the key facts you need to be aware of. As of the 30th of September onwards, for any new leases that are entered into, the reletting costs are calculated on a pro rata basis. And by that, what I mean is depending on how much time has lapsed in the tenancy will determine what the compensation amount is. In addition to that, the reletting costs specifically are now on a formula base. And I'm going to find the slide specific to this because it's really important that I think everyone is actually aware of this. And the slides that you're seeing on the screen have been provided to us by the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, the REIQ, and I'm using them as a guide, and I'll make them available to our investors as well, because it'll actually allow you to have, again, open and transparent information to be able to make informed decisions. So what I'm going to do is just scroll straight through to the appropriate topic, which is our reletting costs. So the formula is on the screen, but essentially the way that which these are calculated moving forward is based on how much of that agreement has been completed. So if less than 25% of the agreement has has lapsed, I guess, or has been used, then essentially the amount of compensation due to you as the investor would be a total of 4 weeks rent. And as you can see on the screen, 25% to less than 50%, 3 weeks, 50% to 75%, 2 weeks, 75% or more would only be 1 week's rent. Now, what is critical as a part of this assessment is what actually constitutes as, I guess, compensation for reletting costs. Previously, we discussed advertising, the letting fee, and then also rent up until. There is no real clarity around this specifically, and until it is tested in the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, everyone would know as QCAT, we're not entirely sure where this is going to land. And by that I mean, at the moment, our assessment and the REIQ's assessment is that the compensation amount that you can see on the screen would include the advertising, the letting fee of 1 week's rent plus GST, and rent up until a new tenant moves in. So what I'm saying, and what is really critical for you to understand, is that if, for example, a new agreement has been entered into past the 30th of September 2024, and that those tenants decided to end their agreement early or break their fixed term lease, essentially we have to use the new legislative formula to be able to calculate the compensation amount due. And let's say it was less than 25%. A total of 4 weeks rent would be payable from the tenant back to you, which would include all compensation amounts for rent, advertising, and rent up until, right? So that means that you get a 4 weeks rent payment and nothing else. This is, I suppose, a topic that when I talk to investors invokes really strong feelings. And we share those feelings with our investors, and we will navigate this as best as we can. The RTA, or the Residential Tenancies Authority here in Queensland, have a calculator online that we will use to be able to navigate the specific costs associated with this. But it's really important for our investors to understand that this will affect you, because essentially that is the total amount of compensation that is now due for reletting costs. Okay, so it would be one fixed amount based on the prorated or the amount used of that specific tenancy. This may bring up lots of questions, and I will try and obviously source this, but a really good way to gather this information is through the RTA. Okay, the Residential Tenancies Authority of Queensland, or give me a call. I'm happy to talk to any investor about this because it does invoke strong feelings. But rest assured, again, we're here to be able to navigate the best outcomes for you guys as investors, and we have different strategies that we'll utilize alongside yourselves to be able to ensure that we get the best outcomes for you. Okay, so that's the major change when it comes to reletting costs. And that's really important because that's going to be the number one topic that we continuously come across for our Queensland and interstate investors. This is not a new concept. If you've got investment properties in New South Wales, they use a similar sort of method to be able to calculate those reletting costs, as well as Canberra and other states. The next topic we're going to talk about is essentially rent payment methods. Look, to be honest with you, this doesn't actually really affect our landlords. As all of our investors know, we use the AILO, A-I-L-O platform, which obviously has an AILO app for our tenants and also our landlords. And AILO actually provides the most number of ways for a tenant to pay, including free options. So we're not actually affected by the rent payment changes in the legislation. So I won't get bogged down in that specifically, but just know as an investor, and rest assured, AILO has been tried and tested by everyone, and that meets all current legislative requirements. The next thing we're going to talk to you about is utility bills. And the utility bills specifically, what we're referring to is if you pay your own utilities bill, and that might be Queensland Urban Utilities or water rates, as you might be familiar with. If you pay those directly and then forward us the account to then on charge to your tenants, they put a maximum time frame on that. So what that means is if you pay your own accounts, we have a 4-week time frame to charge those accounts to the tenancy. In the past, some of our investors have forgot to pass on those utility accounts, and then they might want to send us about 6 months or 8 months worth of accounts to be able to be charged all at once, for example. This will no longer be, I guess, able to be enacted on, because if an account is received and not charged to the tenant within a 4-week period, then we can no longer charge that to the tenants. So for us internally, it's a very straightforward process. For any accounts that we receive to us, we receive the urban utilities charge or the strata, chilled water, whatever it may be, and we then on charge it to the tenants within usually 24 to 48 hours. So there's no real delay from that point of view. The only times we do see delays is obviously if you receive it as the landlord and then send it to us to then on charge to the tenants. You need to be aware that you need to do that as soon as you get the account so that we can then on charge it well within that 4-week time frame to avoid any circumstances where we can no longer charge that account. The other items that we need to be aware of with these legislative changes is other things, which is evidence for bonds. And this is just the RTA, sorry, not the RTA, forgive me, RTA, the Queensland government or the previous Queensland government as a part of these legislative reforms put time frames and requirements as to what we need to do with respect to RTA bond claims moving forward. So as of the 30th of September 24, and there is a transitional period for this for all of our property management teams in the industry to be able to get up to speed. But what they've done is they've put a time frame on when we need to provide evidence to tenants for specific bond claims. So let's say, for example, a tenant moved out of a property and we went and conducted the vacating condition report, and we deemed that there were items that needed to be rectified, and we claimed the tenant's bond as a part of that process. What it means is essentially we have a time now for all of our tenancies to be able to provide them the necessary evidence to be able to then say these are the reasons why we're claiming it, but also the associated costs with that. So we now have a 14-day time frame to provide the required evidence to the tenants and the costings breakdown of that claim. Now, for everyone, that might seem reasonable, the 14-day lodgement and the 14-day period to provide that evidence. And for stock standard black and white items like rent, it is more than reasonable. Where we may see some challenges is scenarios where trade availability might be impacting our ability to be able to actually get that turnaround time. Now, again, rest assured, we have strategies that can combat that. Obviously, we have dedicated trades that will be able to provide us with the necessary quotes, historical quotes, different scenarios like that to ensure that we're providing the evidentiary timeframes. But I foresee our biggest challenge being specialised trades. So something like a cabinet maker, for example, or parquet flooring, or scenarios like that where trade availability is scarce and it may create some complications. But we have the strategies to be able to navigate that for our investors, but it's just so that everyone is aware. So, as a part of our legislative frameworks now, we need to make sure that we're providing those evidentiary requirements within that 14-day period. Now, there are penalty points to everything that I've spoken to you about today, and penalty points are essentially fines. So the legislation requirements have all got a fine attached to it if adherence is not adhered to, ultimately. So what that means is if we don't follow the reletting guidelines and try and charge outside of the framework, then there's a fine associated with that if reported and found that we obviously did do that. Same with rent payment methods, utility bills, maximum bond amounts, everything attached to a penalty unit, which means that there are fines associated with that. So we will be quite strict on these particulars, and that's because it is legislative framework and because obviously there are financial penalties associated with this. But again, our role as your agent and your agency is to navigate these situations to get the best possible outcomes for you. And rest assured, we're more than experienced enough to be able to do that for you. So that's probably bringing it all to a close with respect to what I really wanted to convey to you today. And again, just to recap on that specifically, what we've talked about here today are the 4 particular key topics, which are bonds and bond amounts, reletting costs, and rent payment methods, as well as charging for utilities and services. So they're the 4 key topics. There are further changes, as you can see on the screen, which are going to come into effect on the 1st of May 2025. But again, I'm not going to get bogged down in all of that just yet. We will come back to you as a part of our monthly wraps and keep you informed about these particular changes and how it'll affect you as an investor and what changes are coming into play. But for right now, that's a lot of information for you to absorb around bonds, reletting costs, rent payment methods, and charging for utilities. But again, just know as our valued client and our investors, I am available to you if you want to talk about any of these particulars. Our property management team are obviously across this as well. And my role again is to support the team specifically around these key strategies to ensure that we are always doing what's right for our investors, but adhering to all the legislative frameworks to make sure that you guys can make informed decisions. So I won't take up any more of your time. That's the gist of the legislative framework. Again, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate your time.